Hello, I'm Meshal Malik and you're watching Indus Special. The US youth Kyle Buga Giersdorf, a 16-year-old gamer, won $3 million this Sunday at the first ever Fortnite World Cup. Gamers all around the world see this as vindication for the hours they spend on video games because with the rise in esports, there's a chance to become a professional gamer. But at the same time, the World Health Organization has stated that when gaming is given priority over other activities, there is a real danger of developing a gaming disorder. As the video game market makes strides to become a multi-billion-dollar industry. On today's show, we explore the impact that gaming has on the players. Joining us for this discussion is Cam, founder of GameQuitters.com, which is an online support community for video game addiction. He's joining us from Thailand. We're also joined by Mehta, tech reporter at The Next Web, joining us from New Delhi, India. Thank you both for joining us and welcome to the show. Ivan, let me begin with you. Now, give us a sense of how massive the gaming industry is, how many people are involved, and how many players are engaged with it.
So just to give you context, there are a lot of people and a lot of gaming communities all around the world now. There are separate divisions for mobile gaming. There are separate divisions for console gaming. A recent figure quoted in a launch in India was that by 2022, mobile game industry alone will be $1 billion here. So that's just India. So other countries would have much more revenue, and esports is just beginning in India. In countries like US and European Union, there are tournaments already happening at international level. You talked about Fortnite, and there are millions of dollars of prizes. So this is not new, but gaming is more accessible now. Gaming is more enjoyable. As good as any sport, we used to watch it on TV. Now people tune in to watch games as well. So that's something which people are enjoying, that, hey, this is a new thing which we can enjoy very easily. It's more accessible with more kind of devices.
Right. Ivan, you mentioned here that gaming is more enjoyable. What do you mean by that?
So in earlier days, we used to have games which were not high in terms of fidelity, and everyone didn't have a mean to play the games. Like if 15, 20 years ago, in a developing country like India, if someone had to buy a console, an old console, which would cost a lot. But now they can have that luxury on their mobile devices. They can play really good games like Fortnite or PUBG or Oswald.
Right, so the accessibility of it has in fact increased. But with that, could you also give us a sense of the demographic engaged with gaming? I mean, is it just teenagers? Many sites claim, many experts claim that the average gamer is actually in their early 30s. Tell us what is the on-ground situation in that case?
So, a lot of gamers who are younger might tend to play something like battle royale games, but as they get older, people might tend to switch towards arcade games like, say, Clash of Clans or say Flappy Bird or Candy Crush or some of these easier games. But that doesn't mean these people are not playing. I've seen relatives of mine who are pretty much above their 30s, and they play their games all the time. So it's not really that gaming is limited to one age.
Right.
It's just that the types of game being played across the ages are pretty different.
Right, so there's something for everyone there. Cam, now let me jump to you. Tell us the mind behind those who are developing these games. What do they think of to get people hooked onto them, to get people engaged? From your experience, what is the nature of these games?
Well, games are designed by behavioral psychologists who have PhDs in game design and understanding exactly what they need to do to get you to play them. And they design games to be fun and engaging and to be immersive, and increasingly to get you to spend money, especially with loot boxes and microtransactions. The entire business model of games have changed from being a one-time purchase to being usually free to play, like a game like Fortnite, and then the opportunity for you to spend money within the game, whether that's for cosmetics or opportunities to get an advantage or there's a lot of concerns now that there may be gambling mechanics in a lot of these games. So there's some concerns of the business model and how that's changed.
Right. And in this business model, do they take into account the research that we've heard of about screens, about engaging with technology? It might release dopamine. Does that apply to gaming as well? And do you think developers take that into account?
Absolutely, they take it into account. And you can go on YouTube and watch keynote presentations by some of the top game developers in the world, like the designers of Fortnite, and hear them actually share the exact techniques they've used to make their game very engaging and what they would say fun, but fun really means to be very stimulating and immersive. And that's the whole business model now, is to get you to keep playing and keep spending money. So there's a lot of concerns over that. And tech companies have come under a lot of fire based on their kind of design models. And I think game companies are about to as well.
Right. And hold on to that thought, Cam. I just want to put a quick question to Ivan here. Ivan, while we're talking about esports and the rise in the industry, how it's going to reach the billion-dollar mark and how it's going to become a multi-billion industry in the near future, how much potential and how much space is there for there to be actual professional gamers, for people to actually get into this professionally?
So there have been considerations of, including esports tournament in multiple festivals. So there is a lot of potential. The pool money is rising because more people are interested. Since more people are interested, and the demographic of gamers is ranging from teenagers to, adults who are 40 or 50 years old. There is a vast amount of interest, and so because of that attention span, the companies rather can spend money to grab their attention. So there is pretty much a chance for everyone, from players to game developers.
Right.
It's easier to indulge into this activity. It might not be in every country that you can be a full-time gamer because of the prize money, or if you're a top tier gamer, surely you can do this full time. But if you're not earning money continuously, or if you're not being paid continuously, you can't do that full time. But certainly, as a lot of people were in last couple of decades, a lot of people were musicians or comedians as their sidekick. People can be gamers as their sidekick.
Right. So there is potential there. On that note, thank you so much, Ivan Mehta, for joining us from New Delhi, India. Cam, going back to you, and now let's get into the fact that we have talked about how gaming is ubiquitous almost all across the world. And we also referred to, I did so earlier, that it is also, people are realizing there can be a strong addiction towards gaming. Now, you have also battled with addiction when it comes to gaming. Tell us your experience.
I started gaming when I was about 11 years old. It was just a fun hobby I had, a fun way to kind of relax after going to school and playing hockey. But then I began to experience a lot of bullying, and that bullying led me to want to escape, and I escaped into gaming, and I ended up actually dropping out of high school. I never went to college, and I was gaming up to 16 hours a day. I struggled with anxiety and depression as well, and actually ended up writing a suicide note. And it was that night when I realized I needed to make a change. Now, the change for me to turn my life around was to quit gaming, and that really gave me an opportunity to really have a fresh start in my life. And what I realized was that I actually gamed for very specific reasons. I gamed to escape, I gamed to socially connect with friends, I gamed to feel a sense of progress in my life, and I gamed to feel a sense of purpose. And it was those needs combined with the hyper-stimulation, immersiveness of games that really had a pull on me.
Right, and you mentioned a list of needs here, how you wanted to socialize, how you needed to meet goals. How did gaming fulfill those needs in any capacity?
Well, games are very much designed in a way to not only be able to, be played for hours and hours and hours without you really needing to stop or even being able to pause the game, but increasingly games are a way for you to play with friends and to feel a sense of community all over the world, whether you're gaming in Canada or in Pakistan or India. You can play with people from all over the world. And I never felt like I didn't have friends because I had a lot of friends online. And then games are also designed for you to constantly see yourself progressing and leveling up. You have challenges to finish. You have specific goals to achieve. and games are very structured. You always know what you need to do next. You have to beat this boss, beat this or get this weapon, and beat this level. And those four needs combined can be a very compelling experience.
Right. And when gaming is talked about, it is done so normally in a very frivolous manner. Do you think people trivialize gaming addiction?
I think that the debate is hot because games have been under attack for a long time, especially when it comes to the violence in video game conversation. And so gamers feel very defensive about the fact that this is a hobby they have, it's a passion they have, and it's something that really means a lot to them. And I actually believe that things like esports and games being a normal activity can be totally fine. But when it crosses the line into being an addiction or when someone's really struggling, I believe those people should be able to get help as well. And overall, I think that we can support both. People game and they have fun, and it's a normal activity, and some people play and it is an addiction, and we need to help them.
And how does your online support community help with those who do feel like they're battling with addiction?
So there are over 75,000 people every single month coming to GameQuarters.com to seek help from 95 countries around the world. So this isn't a small issue, and it's not just related to people in the US, it's people all over the world, including Pakistan. But mostly we try to connect people. We try to give them resources to help them understand more about how gaming can become addictive, why it becomes addictive, what needs it's fulfilling for you, new activities you can do instead, how to deal with cravings, and really help them find new friends and peers that can support them along the way. And that's whether you're a gamer or you're a parent who's concerned. We have resources for you, and also for professionals as well. I speak all over the world doing workshops for professionals on understanding how to screen for this issue, find people who are struggling, and treat them as well.
Right. And Gam, I just want to show a little clip of the TED Talk you gave. Let's take a look at it.
Video game addiction is a habit developed over time, becoming your go-to activity whenever you're bored. So parents, it starts with you. I'm sorry to say, but the iPad is not the new babysitter. They need interaction, not entertainment. Next, gamers play for very specific reasons. Identify their motivations and help them find these in other activities. Help them with their social skills. The truth is, they struggle to make friends. Lastly, don't punish them for their desire to play these games. Come from a place of compassion and encouragement, not judgment.
So Cam, over here, you had some very powerful words for society at large and parents especially. Take us through it. How do you think society forces people to get to the point in which they have to turn towards gaming? And what role do they play in alienating children? And so they are forced to get involved with gaming at such a deep level?
Well, first of all, I think people start very young nowadays. The average screen time for kids under 2 years old is over 3 hours a day, which for me, someone under 2 years old doesn't need any gaming or any screen time. They're kind of excited about anything. And if you give them a device, of course, they're going to be interested in it. But I think it's problematic over time. I also think that there's a lot of stress in the world these days. Schoolwork is hard. We don't spend as much time playing outside. A lot of suburban areas were far more kind of disconnected from our communities like we were in the past. And gaming increasingly is the one single activity that people have, that kids have growing up, and they don't have other hobbies anymore. And a lot of the members who come to our website, they're 22, 23, 24 years old, and gaming is the only thing that they know. And gaming is very effective at being the only thing you can do, because you can do it for 15 hours a day. You can make friends. You can see goals be achieved. And so I think we need to have more balance in our activities. We need to be exercising more, spending more time outside, and really reconnecting not only the family, but also the community at large, really having kind of aunts and uncles, cousins involved, meeting your neighbors, really having a strong sense of community, because when gaming is the only source of your social connection or the only place that you're feeling a sense of progress, that's where it can become a problem.
Right, and that is a really important thing for parents and community at large to keep in mind. Cam, just a last question to you, and this is probably one of the most frequently asked questions when we talk about gaming. Whether the violent content within them also triggers violent reactions amongst the players. Even the New Zealand shooter in his manifesto mentioned that he was inspired by Fortnite. I mean, I'm not saying that it is something that can be generalized, but it does give people a lot to think about. What's your take on that?
Overall, the research on whether playing violent video games actually leads to criminal activity is very low. There isn't really a connection there. There's a slight connection that playing video games can make you slightly more aggressive. And I think the bigger issue at large is that when people are playing video games online, they tend to be anonymous, and in social media as well. And there is a bit of a disconnection between seeing someone online as just a username or an avatar and remembering that they're a real person. You just have to go to my Twitter mentions or my YouTube comments to see a lot of people who will say really mean things that they wouldn't say to someone in person when they could actually see that person and realize it's, you know, someone's son or someone's brother. And, you know, I think we all need to come together more. So playing violent video games doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to become aggressive and go commit a criminal act. But I think we always need to remember, are we developing compassion for people? Are we developing empathy? And are we modeling the type of citizen that we want to be, not only in our communities, but around the world?
Right, and that's a great note to end this segment on. Thank you so much, Adair, for joining us from Thailand. We're going to take a short break. When we return, we're going to discuss the rising trend of working remotely and its social impact. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. Now, remote working is on the rise and it's allowing people to work outside conventional office spaces. But is remote working a win-win for everybody involved? On today's show, let's take a closer look at this topic. Joining us for this discussion is Mr. Rajneesh Narula, Professor of International Business Regulation and Co-Director of John H. Dunning Center for International Business at the University of Reading, joining us from Reading, UK. Also joining us is Professor Mark Graham, Professor of Internet Geography at the University of Oxford, Berlin, joining us from Berlin. Thank you both for joining us and welcome to the show. Mr. Narula, now let me begin with you. Why do you think remote working is on the rise? What are the factors behind it driving it?
Well, I think obviously in the first place is the growth of the internet and the increasing ease with which you can get in touch and do things on long distances through Skype or through by email and so on. And so internet and communication technologies have made it much more easy now to communicate, to transfer information, transfer documents, and so forth. So that's one of the main reasons. The second reason, I think, has to do with the what we call the gig economy, the growing inclination towards outsourcing activities, breaking down and modularizing activities that were once done in a single place by a single person or by a team of people. So when you break activities down into modular form, you can outsource. So we see this growth of outsourcing now that happened first in the manufacturing industry, now spreading across all industries.
Right. Now, Mr. Narula, give us a sense of why this is happening. How do you think this is significantly changing the employment landscape?
Well, it's something that reduces the need for having in-house expertise in certain areas. Things that can be codified, modularized, can be outsourced to firms located in cheaper locations. So it reduces costs. The biggest effect, of course, for firms is that you don't have to have long-term contracts. You don't have to have physical facilities. So you're reducing your costs in a very significant way. So that, I think, is from the firm's point of view, the biggest advantage. From the individual's point of view, of course, there are certain people who could not or might not have been able to work in the old economy because they had children or they have other reasons that they cannot travel to a central location. So there's a large amount of semi-employed or unemployed people who were falling through the cracks and now are able to work.
Right. And Professor Mark Graham, while we're talking about all of this and how it's allowing greater access to employment for many people, are there any downfalls for remote working?
Definitely. I mean, I think we've talked about some of the positives of this sort of work. It allows people to escape some of the constraints of their local labor markets. It allows people to take on relatively short contracts. But some of those things are create some of the problems that we see. So a key downfall is simply that we're seeing a lot of work move from being governed by traditional employment contracts where workers have a job, they have an employer, and they're given protections that come with that employment contract, to having a much more precarious type of relationship with what is in effect often their employers. So what that means is that you often don't know when your next job can be coming in. If you fall sick, you're not going to get paid. If you need to take care of someone or need to take care of yourself, you're not going to be paid. And so with that precarity come a lot of problems in these online labor markets.
Right. And do you think this, with all the factors you've mentioned, workers, employees are also becoming more vulnerable at the hands of corporations who just want to exploit their work for their own gains?
Well, I think that's the issue, right? When you create what's in effect a planetary scale labor market, you get workers from all over the world competing with one another. You get workers in Europe, in North America, in Asia, in Africa, all competing for the same jobs. Every year, we're getting more and more people join the internet, looking for new opportunities, new jobs, all competing for those same jobs. And so this is in effect creating an oversupply of labor power on some of these platforms, which can have the effect of driving down wages and driving down working conditions. Individual workers then have very little bargaining power in that sort of context, unless you have very specialized skills that not many other people have.
Right. Mr. Narula, building on to that point, governments also fear that with this, traditional employment might fall, with firms seeking out employees that are coming at a cheaper cost. They are remote. They don't have to get them trained. They don't have to bring them into the environment. Do you see that as a real fear?
Yes, that is, in fact, a fairly significant issue. Now that, I mean, they're saving money, but from society's point of view, this is quite costly. Now, for instance, health insurance, providing facilities, education, pensions, all of these things that used to be taken for granted in a regular job are now no longer included when people utilize these sort of outsourcing arrangements. So the strength of the employment contract that was key to keeping people and societies intact are gone. You don't have all the rights that you had as an employee. Then they're somehow diluted when you remote work. So it's a delicate balancing act for society, because now the cost is picked up by governments. Who's paying your pension? Who's paying for your healthcare? Who's paying for your child support? This is now being transferred over to the state.
Right.
So the companies are saving money, but they're making a transfer.
Right. And with all of this and people turning to remote working, do you see there being a failure on part of global governments? Do you see there being a failure on part of society as to why people have to turn to remote working?
I don't think it's a failure in society. I mean, especially in countries with high unemployment, this is a good thing in a way, that people that had fallen through the cracks. It's created, as you know, the back office processing in South Asia and India and Pakistan. The growing numbers of people have now work in terms of providing call centers, in terms of doing the processing for American, European companies. So this is actually a good thing. It's been these are people who would have ordinarily done no work whatsoever. So they have some work is better than no work, if you see what I mean.
Right. But at the same time, the point that I'm trying to get to, and I want Professor Graham's point of view on this as well, that local governments, when local corporations fail to provide enough employment, brings about a vacuum for other firms to come in, go to countries where there are weaker human rights laws, weaker wage laws, and go exploit the workforce there. So do you also agree with Mr. Narula that you don't think it's a failure on the part of governments?
I think what we need strong labor market institutions that can help workers. We need an ability for workers to collectively bargain, to collectively organize. We need governments who create rules that make sense for the platform economy, that make sense for the gig economy, that can make sure that workers, irrespective of how they're classified, whether you're an employee, whether you're an independent contractor, still don't fall below some key thresholds that we consider to be decent work or fair work. Nobody, irrespective of how they're classified, should be earning below a local minimum wage wherever they're located. That's why we have things like minimum wages all over the world. I think that it's an old saying that a bad job is better than no job, and that's certainly the case for any individual who's struggling and might have the option between a bad job and a no job. But that doesn't mean that we should be satisfied with bad jobs, right? We can do better. We can try and make sure that some of these are huge companies that are outsourcing these jobs. We should expect more from them, and we should expect that they're creating decent jobs all around the world and not just participating in this sort of race to the bottom.
Right. Mr. Narula, while we're talking all of this and the work culture that has developed in recent years, do you feel that this is a reaction to it? We heard about the toxic work cultures, late night shifts. There is no saying goodbye to work. Now people can contact you on WhatsApp, if not email. Do you think that remote working is trying to get out of that system?
No. I think remote working is very much part of that system. The idea of a 24-hour cycle, the fact that people, certainly knowledge-intensive industries, you don't have 9-to-5 jobs anymore. Everyone is wired and functioning 18 hours a day. You wake up to your mobile phone and you've got your messages before you've had your morning coffee or tea. So certainly, remote working, I wouldn't say it's something that it's not going to go away for sure. It's here. It's finding the right balance between the two. And Mark and I think agree on this. I think we've had a similar discussion previously. It isn't going to go away. It's about how it's managed. It's how how the costs are properly divided, how in terms of society and individuals. So this is sort of where the battleground is coming, is finding a global system of regulating these activities.
Right. And on that note, thank you so much, Mr. Rajneesh Narula, for joining us and talking to us. Professor Mark Graham, now going to the social impact of all of this, we're seeing a lot of young people move towards remote working, not only because they want to, but the fact that even as the International Labour Organization records, young people under 25 years of age are less likely to find employment as older workers. So it's almost as if this is their last resort to. What is the social impact of all of this?
It's a good question, and it really depends on the location in which we're talking about. But I think a key social impact is some of what Rajesh is talking about. There's a lot of sort of structural risk that's transferred onto the individual worker. This is formerly risk that was borne by the employer, by the company contracting that work. And so workers who participate in the gig economy now really have to figure out ways of managing this risk. And that really matters if they become sick, if they're trying to plan a family, if they're trying to plan their career. It's hard to do that when you don't know what your job's going to be tomorrow, let alone in a year from now.
Right. And on that note, I'd also like to introduce Hamza Khan, entrepreneur and the author of The Burnout Gamble, joining us from Toronto, Canada. Thank you so much, Hamza, for joining us. Now, tell us, you're the author of The Burnout Gamble. Explain to us, do you think that people going towards remote working is a way of trying to find a more healthy work-life balance after all of this burnout?
Wow, you've first of all, thank you so much for having me. I think that you've asked a multi-million-dollar question. If you consider the entirety of savings across every company in the world, I mean, this is a billion-dollar question. American Express reported in 2018 that it experienced annual savings of $10 to $15 million a year thanks to remote work options. But this is about the individual. This is about taking a theory Y approach to management. When you assume that people are happy to work on their own schedule, they're self-motivated to complete tasks and enjoy taking ownership of their work, you see a litany of benefits. You see flexible schedules, working from any location, time with family. I mean, it lowers stress and boosts morale without a doubt.
Right. So do you think in any way this is a failure of capitalism? If people are reverting back to going to a lifestyle in which they can prioritize other things in life, do you think this is a failure of the society and the corporations people have dedicated so much of their time and their lives to?
I would be afraid of labeling this as a failure of society, but I do think the onus is very much on leaders, especially leaders who are taking a theory X approach, which is a pessimistic view of people. It assumes that people dislike work, they have very little ambition, and are unwilling to take responsibility. And I think that when you start thinking of people like that, when you start thinking of employees like that, it creates a really toxic work environment, especially for younger generations. And I speak for myself as a millennial and all of my peers. I mean, we are very much internally driven, and we're driven by experiences more than we're driven by physical and material possessions, if you will. We value things like having the flexibility to go to the gym, to be able to walk our dogs, to be able to spend time with our families, to be able to take trips and vacations and not have to worry about, for example, asking for time off to go to see a dentist or go to the bank for an appointment.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's where I stand on that.
Right. So Hamza, just before I let you go, I do want a little about what burnout means and the implications of it. I mean, millennials are labeled as just being lazy, and you tried to debunk that in the previous answer. But when we're talking about this massive burnout, what are the reasons behind it, and how dangerous can it be?
That's a great question. And the World Health Organization has reclassified burnout very recently in the last couple of months. And they now describe it as the result of chronic workplace stress that has gone unmanaged. So they've relegated occupation burnout to career. So it's occupational burnout that we're speaking about specifically. But it really stems from performance pressure that is caused by factors from without and factors from within, leading people to experience a state of mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion. So it's really about overwork and not feeling like you're enough.
Right. And what are these factors from within you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, these are responses to, again, that feeling of not being enough, not feeling like you're progressive enough, efficient enough, perfect enough, satisfied enough, and innovative enough, that causes you to feel a compulsion to work harder, which is the first step in a 12-step process of burning out, as described by Dr. Herbert Freudenberger and Dr. Gail North. And once you embark on the journey of burnout, starting with the compulsion to prove yourself, that leads to working harder and all of the other stages that take you all the way down the path of surefire occupational burnout.
Right. And why do you think this lack of satisfaction and this lack of internal pressure and also this a feeling of not being enough is so prevalent nowadays? Do you think it was always there, or people are just now ready to acknowledge that it is something that they should factor in?
It's a great question. It's always been there, but it has been increasing over time. When I embarked down the process of writing the book, The Burnout Gamble, one of the first questions I asked is the time in which I was writing it, 2017, more stressful than it was in the past? And the answer was definitively yes. I mean, you're experiencing record levels of competition just based on the size of the population alone, increasing feelings of alienation, societal pressures, and messages that are warping our ideas about what's expected in work, and that discount the role that technology, especially social media, is playing. And then you see an epidemic of loneliness taking place all over the world. And then finally, the economy. I mean, these are factors that are outside of our control that are preheating the world for burnout.
Right. And on that note, thank you so much, Hamza. Another guest who's joined, Professor Samina Yasmeen, teacher and researcher at the University of Western Australia School of Social Sciences. She's joining us from Perth. Thank you so much, Professor Yasmeen, for joining us and talking to us. Welcome to the show. Now, as we were talking to Professor Graham about the social impact of remote working, I'd like your take on it as well.
I think socially it's not really very good because people seem to think that they'll get a good time, they can work at their own pace, they don't have to get ready and go to work. But I've been talking to people even today, those who stay away from workplace and work remotely, they in fact stop being in contact with other people. So we're social beings, we need contact with people, we need to be able to see them, talk to them, and that dimension gets missed while working at home. Now, if you have a lot of people around the home, then the whole purpose of working at home fails as well. So I think long-term costs are that people fail to build social networks that are not just internet-based. So the people-to-people contact impacts a lot in how people then later on start shaping their lives.
Right. And that social impact, of course, is considerable. But also another side of this, and I want Professor Graham's take on it as well, is do you feel that people who would have traditionally come into the workforce are now joining it? Perhaps those who are above a certain age, women with children at home. Do you think that the workforce is expanding now more than before?
I think that's absolutely right. So the workforce is expanding not just geographically into new territories through what you might think of as this planetary labor market, but also into different demographics. And we see this especially in lots of countries with women who often prefer, for various reasons, to work from home. So it can be women, it can be older people. We're without a doubt seeing that. And I think that's some of the dynamic of this global gig economy that we need to pay attention to. So it's providing opportunities to new demographics and new places. People are grateful to have some of these jobs, but again, that doesn't mean that we should be satisfied with substandard or indecent work just because it's better than nothing.
Right. And Professor Yasmeen, with greater access to employment in parts in which traditionally, let's say, women did not go out to work, but now they can so from their homes, do you feel like this is creating ripples through society at large?
I think it definitely changes the society because there are people who previously were not really in the workplace, and the fact that now they can work from home, they can earn living, it gives them confidence, especially women, as the other speaker is talking about. That changes the way they relate to their members in the family and in the wider community. It also gives them agency, like they can be listed as the top 10, 20, 50 women or men who have made their mark in the social space while working from home. So it definitely changes culture. But I think the other culture that I'm concerned about is that it changes the culture of work connectedness. So people start working in silos. So, the idea of working collaboratively then really goes out of the way. So unless you're happy just working online with others, I think it changes the culture, but it changes it in more than one way, and it's not all positive.
Right. And Professor Yasmeen, that is an argument that comes a lot when we talk about internet and anything that is remote. It comes with the argument of social media that it's increasing isolation. With that, as an observer of society and as a professor who witnesses young students, how do you think that's impacting behavior?
I think it makes people less able to collaborate with each other. So at one level, they are all connected because they're all on Facebook or on Instagram or whatever else. So they think they're connected, but because they're just working away from home, they tend to miss out on that camaraderie. I've noticed in my students, and I often raise their attention to this, is that if they're just listening to the lectures online, which basically, in my sense, would be working from home, they can listen to what I'm saying or what other guests are saying, but the feeling in the classroom, the interaction with other students, with academics, they miss out on that. So they only have one-dimensional communication of information. That impacts on their sense of wellness. In fact, there's been data that's been coming out that the prevalence of students not feeling well and even suffering from mental illness has continuously increased. So I think working online away from communities makes it easy for us. Like I know some students who think, gee, I don't have to change. I can just stay in my room and I can listen to the lecture. But then it also impacts on the way we learn how to be social beings.
Right. On that note, Professor Samina, we'll have to end the show as we're running out of time. Thank you so much for joining us from Perth and talking to us. Thank you, Professor Mark Graham, for joining us from Berlin. Also, thank you, Hamza Khan, for joining us earlier and talking to us from Toronto. Thank you for watching Indus Special. We will see you again next week with more stories. Till then, goodbye and take care.